Commander Zethkari stood before the holographic display, his 6 arms crossed in contemplation as he observed the latest intelligence reports. The Galactic Defense Council had called an emergency session, and representatives from 12 different species filled the chamber. Each delegate bore the weight of concern on their alien features. "The situation grows worse by the day," announced High Chancellor Vrex, her crystalline form shimmering with anxiety. "The Drakthol Empire has conquered 17 systems in the past month alone. Their war machine appears unstoppable." Admiral Korvash, a massive reptilian being from the Saurian Collective, slammed his clawed fist on the table. "We have thrown everything at them. Our most advanced battleships, our finest tactical minds, our most devastating weapons. Nothing works. They adapt to every strategy we employ." The room fell silent as the gravity of their situation settled in. For 3,000 years, the galaxy had known relative peace. Wars were fought with calculated precision, following established rules of engagement that had been refined over millennia. Battles were elegant affairs, almost ceremonial in nature, where superior technology and tactical brilliance determined the victor. The Drakthol had changed everything. They fought like wild beasts using tactics that defied all military doctrine. They sacrificed their own forces without hesitation, launched suicide attacks that made no strategic sense, and employed psychological warfare that left entire populations paralyzed with fear. "Perhaps," suggested Counselor Mirren, her ethereal voice barely audible, "we need to consider alternative approaches. There are rumors of a species in the Outer Rim territories, a young race that has recently achieved faster-than-light travel." "You speak of the humans," Zethkari said, his mandibles clicking with what his species considered skepticism. "I have reviewed their files. They are primitive by our standards. No energy shields, no plasma weaponry, no gravitic manipulation technology. What could they possibly offer?" Mirren's translucent form flickered slightly. "Their history suggests they understand warfare in ways we may have forgotten. They have fought continuously for their entire recorded history. Not elegant campaigns, but brutal, desperate conflicts where survival was the only goal." The chamber erupted in discussion. Some delegates scoffed at the suggestion, while others seemed intrigued. The idea that a primitive species could succeed where the combined might of 12 advanced civilizations had failed seemed absurd. High Chancellor Vrex raised her hand for silence. "Show us their military records," she commanded. The holographic display shifted, showing footage from human conflicts throughout their history. The delegates watched in growing amazement as primitive humans wielding crude weapons fought with a ferocity that none of them had ever witnessed. They saw soldiers charging through fields of explosive projectiles, warriors fighting hand-to-hand in muddy trenches, and pilots diving their aircraft directly into enemy vessels. "This is madness," whispered Admiral Korvash. "They fight like they have no regard for their own lives." "Exactly," Mirren replied. "They fight as if everything depends on victory. Not honor, not territory, not resources, everything, their very existence." Zethkari studied the images more carefully. He noticed something that the others had missed. Despite the apparent chaos and brutality, there was a pattern to human warfare. They were not simply wild animals throwing themselves at their enemies. They learned, adapted, and innovated with remarkable speed. "Look at their technological progression," he pointed out, manipulating the display to show human military advancement over time. In less than a century, they went from riding animals into battle to splitting the atom. They developed concepts we never considered necessary. The display showed human innovations, camouflage that made soldiers nearly invisible, weapons designed for maximum psychological impact, tactics that turned disadvantages into advantages. They had created specialized units for every conceivable situation, from underwater demolition to operating behind enemy lines. "Their approach to warfare is fundamentally different from ours," Zethkari continued. "We fight to achieve objectives with minimal losses. They fight to destroy their enemies completely, regardless of cost." Counselor Mirren nodded approvingly. "There is something else. Our analysts have discovered that humans have never truly been united as a species. They have fought each other as much as they have fought external threats. They have developed tactics for every situation because they have faced every situation. The implications were staggering. While other species had achieved unity before reaching the stars, humans had brought their conflicts with them into space. They were not just experienced warriors. They were experts in fighting enemies who thought differently, who used different technologies, who had different advantages. But they are so primitive, Admiral Corvash protested. Their fastest ships barely reach half-light speed. Their weapons are crude projectile devices. How could they possibly stand against the Drakthul fleet? High Chancellor Vrex had been quietly considering the proposal. Perhaps their primitiveness is not a weakness but a strength. The Drakthul have adapted to our advanced technologies and refined tactics. They may not be prepared for something completely different. She activated the communication array. Open a channel to the human government. I want to speak with their military leaders immediately. The response came faster than expected. Within hours, a small human delegation arrived at the galactic capital, aboard a ship that looked utterly foreign compared to the sleek vessels of other species. It was angular, heavily armored, and bristled with weapons that seemed designed for close combat, rather than elegant space warfare. The human delegation was led by a woman who introduced herself as General Sarah Chen. She was smaller than most of the alien delegates, with no natural armor or impressive physical features. Yet there was something in her eyes that made even Admiral Corvash uncomfortable. It was the look of someone who had seen terrible things and had found ways to survive them. We understand you have a problem with something called the Drakthul Empire, General Chen said without preamble. We've reviewed the tactical reports you transmitted. We can help. What makes you so confident? Zethkari asked. Your technology is centuries behind ours. General Chen smiled, and it was not a reassuring expression. Because we've been fighting wars like this our entire history. You've been fighting to win territory, to gain resources, to prove points. The Drakthul are fighting to eliminate threats. That's a war we understand very well. She gestured to the holographic display which still showed images of Drakthul tactics. You see chaos and brutality. We see patterns and opportunities. You're fighting them like they're an advanced military force. But they're not. They're survivors just like us. And we know how to beat survivors. The chamber fell silent as the implications sank in. Perhaps the galaxy's salvation would come not from its most advanced species, but from its most experienced warriors. General Chen stood before the massive tactical display in the Galactic Defense Council's war room, studying the latest intelligence on Drakthul movements. The alien commanders watched her with a mixture of curiosity and skepticism as she traced patterns across the holographic star map with her finger. Your previous engagements have all followed the same basic structure, she said, highlighting several past battles. You detect their fleet. You position your forces in optimal formation. You engage at maximum effective range using your superior technology. Then you wonder why you lose. Commander Zethkari's mandibles clicked, and what humans had learned was a sign of confusion. This is standard military doctrine, proven effective across thousands of years of warfare. Against enemies who follow the same rules, Chen replied. But the Drakthul don't care about your rules. Look at this pattern. She manipulated the display to show the last 5 major engagements. Every time you establish a battle line, they break it by ramming their ships directly into yours. Every time you try to maintain distance, they close rapidly and engage in close combat. They're not trying to win elegant victories. They're trying to make you bleed. Admiral Corvash leaned forward, his massive frame casting shadows across the display. Then how do you propose we counter such reckless tactics? Chen smiled grimly. We don't counter them. We use them. She pulled up historical files from Earth's military database. On my world, we had an expression. If you can't beat them, join them. If you can join them, beat them. The display showed footage from human conflicts that made the alien delegates uncomfortable. They watched human soldiers using improvised weapons, fighting in conditions that would kill most other species, and employing tactics that seemed to border on insanity. This is from our Second World War, Chen explained, pointing to a scene of human paratroopers landing behind enemy lines. My ancestors learned that sometimes the best way to fight an unpredictable enemy is to become more unpredictable than they are. High Chancellor Vrex's crystalline form shimmered with uncertainty. You are suggesting we abandon centuries of military evolution? I'm suggesting you remember what military evolution is actually for, Chen replied. You've evolved to fight civilized enemies who want to minimize casualties and maximize efficiency. The Drakthul evolved to fight for survival against overwhelming odds. That's why they're winning. She activated a new display showing human ship designs. Unlike the elegant curves and graceful lines of galactic vessels, human ships looked like flying fortresses. They were angular, heavily armored, and covered in weapon systems that seemed designed for brutal close-range combat. Our ships aren't as fast or as sophisticated as yours, Chen admitted. But they're designed for one thing, staying in the fight long enough to hurt the enemy worse than they hurt us. We call it attrition warfare. Colonel Marcus Torres, Chen's second-in-command, stepped forward. General, perhaps we should show them the Yorktown incident. Chen nodded and pulled up classified footage from a recent human engagement with unknown hostiles in their own space. The delegates watched in amazement as a single human cruiser, heavily damaged and apparently crippled, continued fighting against 3 enemy vessels. The ship had lost main power. Life support was failing and the crew was down to emergency rations, Chen narrated. According to your military doctrine, they should have surrendered or retreated. Instead, they rigged their reactor to overload and rammed it into the largest enemy ship. The alien commanders watched in horror as the human vessel exploded, taking 2 enemy ships with it and crippling the 3rd. This is suicide, Admiral Korvash protested. How does destroying your own forces constitute victory? Because the enemy learned something important, Torres replied. They learned that fighting humans means accepting casualties no matter how certain your victory seems. Word spread. The next time hostile forces encountered human ships, they hesitated. That hesitation cost them the engagement. Counselor Mirren's ethereal form flickered with what her species displayed as deep thought. You use fear as a weapon. Fear, confusion, and unpredictability, Chen confirmed. The Drakthul think they understand warfare because they've been successful against conventional forces. But they've never fought an enemy that's willing to lose battles to win wars. She pulled up detailed analysis of Drakthul psychology and tactics. Look at their behavior patterns. They're aggressive, but they're also calculating. They take risks, but only when they believe the odds favor them. They're not actually crazy. They're just more willing to accept casualties than you are. That means they have breaking points, Torres added. Every army does. We just need to find what makes them crack. Commander Zethkari studied the human analysis with growing interest. Their approach was completely alien to everything he had learned about warfare, yet it made a disturbing amount of sense. What do you propose? He asked. Chen gestured to a sector map showing current Drakthul positions. First, we stop trying to fight their main fleet. That's where they're strongest and most confident. Instead, we hit their supply lines, their communication networks, their support infrastructure. We make them fight the kind of war they're not prepared for. Guerrilla warfare, Torres explained. Small units, hit-and-run tactics, attacking targets that force them to spread their forces thin. Your ships are faster and more maneuverable than theirs, Chen continued. But you've been using that advantage to maintain distance. Instead, we use it to get close, hit hard, and disappear before they can respond effectively. She highlighted several key systems in Drakthul space. These are mining colonies, supply depots, and communication relays. They're lightly defended because the Drakthul never expected anyone to attack them directly. We changed that assumption. The plan that emerged over the following hours was unlike anything the Galactic Defense Council had ever attempted. Mixed human-alien strike forces would penetrate deep into Drakthul territory, not to conquer systems, but to cause maximum disruption with minimum forces. The key is psychological impact, Chen explained. Every successful raid makes them question their security. Every destroyed supply convoy forces them to divert resources to protection duties. Every time they have to wonder where we'll strike next, we're winning. Admiral Korvash remained skeptical. And if they adapt to these tactics as they have to our conventional warfare? Chen's smile was predatory. Then we adapt faster. That's what humans do. We've been fighting each other for so long that adaptation isn't just a military strategy for us. It's a survival trait. High Chancellor Vrex made the decision that would change the course of the war. Prepare the first strike force. I want human advisors embedded with each unit. If we are to learn this new way of war, we must learn it completely. As the meeting dispersed, Commander Zethkari approached General Chen. I have studied your species' history extensively in the past few days. There is something that concerns me. Humans seem to excel at warfare, but you also seem to excel at destroying yourselves. How do we know you will not turn these skills against us once the Drakthul are defeated? Chen considered the question seriously. Because we've learned something else from all those centuries of fighting. The best way to avoid future wars is to make sure your allies know exactly how terrible you can be as an enemy. Fear keeps the peace better than any treaty ever written. It was not the reassuring answer Zethkari had hoped for, but it was an honest one. As he watched the humans begin preparing for operations that would have been considered war crimes by galactic standards, he wondered if they were making a deal with devils to fight demons. Only time would tell if the cure would prove worse than the disease. The first joint operation launched exactly 72 hours after the strategy meeting. Captain Lisa Rodriguez guided her modified human destroyer through the Kepler Nebula, leading a strike force of 12 ships representing 6 different species. The nebula's electromagnetic interference would mask their approach to the Drakthul mining facility, designated Target Alpha. "This feels wrong," muttered Sub-Commander Vexrin through the comm system. The Altarian pilot had been trained in precision warfare, where every shot was calculated and every maneuver followed established protocols. "We are abandoning everything we know about proper military conduct." "Good," Rodriguez replied, checking her weapons systems. "If it feels wrong to you, it'll feel impossible to them." The strike force had been deliberately assembled to create maximum confusion. Human ships bristling with kinetic weapons, Saurian vessels equipped with particle beams, crystalline fighters that could phase through certain materials, and ethereal scouts that were nearly undetectable. To any Drakthul commander, the mixed fleet would look like a collection of random units rather than a coordinated attack force. That was exactly the point. "Target in sight," reported Lieutenant Commander Chen Wei from the lead reconnaissance ship. Minimal defensive presence, just as human intelligence predicted. 2 patrol cruisers and a defensive platform. Sub-Commander Vexrin's tactical display showed the mining facility in detail. It was a massive operation, with automated extractors pulling rare minerals from 3 asteroids simultaneously. The refinery complex could process enough raw materials to supply a battle fleet for months. Standard protocol would be to demand surrender first, Vexrin noted. "Standard protocol is why you've been losing," Rodriguez replied. "Demanding surrender gives them time to call for help, destroy valuable intelligence, and prepare defenses." "We don't want surrender. We want chaos." She opened the general comm channel. "All units execute Operation Thunderstrike. Remember, we're not here to capture anything. We're here to break things and leave." The attack began with the ethereal scouts disabling the communication array without warning. The facility's distress call cut off mid-transmission, leaving any listeners wondering what had happened. Meanwhile, the crystalline fighters phased through the defensive platform shields and began destroying critical systems from within. The human ships led the main assault, their projectile weapons tearing through the station's hull with devastating efficiency. Unlike energy weapons that could be absorbed or deflected, the simple kinetic rounds punched through armor and continued destroying everything in their path. "This is butchery," Vexrin protested as he watched human Marines boarding one of the patrol cruisers. "They are not even giving the crew a chance to fight back properly." "That's the idea," Rodriguez said, coordinating the demolition of the refinery complex. "The goal isn't to give them a fair fight. The goal is to win so quickly and so completely that word spreads about what happens when you fight humans." The boarding action was unlike anything in galactic military history. Human Marines moved through the ship in small teams, using weapons that seemed primitive but were devastatingly effective in close quarters. They cleared each section with methodical efficiency, not stopping to take prisoners or secure equipment. "Target neutralized," reported Sergeant Major Williams from the captured cruiser. "We've downloaded their navigation data and communication logs. Setting charges now." "Wait," Vexrin interrupted. "That vessel could be salvaged. The technology alone would be valuable for intelligence purposes." "Negative," Rodriguez replied firmly. "We're not here to capture ships. We're here to send a message." The patrol cruiser exploded in a brilliant flash, taking its secrets with it. The second patrol vessel, seeing the fate of its companion, attempted to retreat. It made it exactly 47 seconds before human fighters caught up and destroyed it. The entire operation lasted 18 minutes. When it was over, the mining facility was an expanding cloud of debris, and the strike force was already jumping to hyperspace. But the real impact came 3 days later, when reports of the attack spread through Drakthul space. The speed and brutality of the assault defied everything they understood about galactic warfare. Enemy forces had appeared without warning, destroyed a valuable facility, and vanished before reinforcements could arrive. "This is impossible," growled War Leader Kratham as he reviewed the tactical reports in his flagship's command center. "Our intelligence networks detected no major fleet movements. Where did these forces come from? His tactical officer, a younger Drakthul named Vektar, highlighted the attack routes on the battle display. The assault force was small, fewer than 20 vessels. They struck from multiple vectors simultaneously, suggesting either perfect coordination or what? Or they were not operating under standard military doctrine. The attack patterns suggest they were not trying to minimize their own casualties or preserve captured assets. They simply destroyed everything and left. Cratham's claws scratched deep gouges in his command chair's armrest. The Drakthul had achieved their recent victories by exploiting the galactic military's reluctance to accept heavy casualties. Their enemies always tried to preserve their forces, which made their tactics predictable. But this new enemy seemed to care only about inflicting damage. What species were they? He demanded. Mixed forces, Vektar replied nervously. Saurian, Altarian, crystalline, ethereal, and unknown vessels of a design not in our databases. Unknown vessels? Vektar enhanced the tactical display, showing grainy images of the human ships. They looked nothing like the elegant vessels used by other galactic species. These ships were angular, heavily armored, and covered in weapon systems that seemed designed for close-range combat. Analysis suggests these are from a species not previously encountered in galactic warfare. Their technology appears primitive by our standards, but their tactics— Vektar paused, searching for words. Their tactics suggest they are experienced in total warfare. Cratham studied the images carefully. Total warfare was a concept the Drakthul understood well. It meant fighting not just to win battles, but to completely destroy the enemy's ability and will to fight. It meant accepting that victory required sacrifice. It was exactly the kind of warfare that had made the Drakthul successful against their more civilized opponents. Increase patrols around all mining facilities, he ordered. Deploy additional defensive platforms and establish rapid response fleets at key locations. But even as he gave the orders, Cratham felt a cold certainty settling in his chest. The enemy had chosen when and where to strike. They had achieved complete surprise and overwhelming local superiority. Most importantly, they had demonstrated that no Drakthul facility was truly safe. The psychological impact was immediate. Mining operations began requesting additional security. Transport convoys demanded escorts. Supply depot commanders filed reports expressing concern about their defensive capabilities. For the first time since their campaign began, Drakthul forces were thinking defensively instead of focusing purely on conquest. In the Galactic Defense Council's temporary headquarters, General Chen reviewed the mission reports with satisfaction. The operation had achieved every objective and established important precedents for future actions. Casualty report? She asked Colonel Torres. 0 friendly losses, minimal damage to participating vessels. All personnel recovered successfully. And intelligence gathering? Extensive. We now have detailed information on Drakthul communication protocols, supply routes, and defensive thinking. More importantly, we have confirmation that they can be surprised and that they will divert resources to protection duties when threatened. Chen nodded approvingly. Phase 2 begins tomorrow. I want simultaneous strikes on targets in 6 different systems. Let's see how they handle fighting on multiple fronts. Commander Zethkari observed the planning session with growing unease. The humans were approaching warfare with the same methodical precision that his species applied to scientific research. They were treating the destruction of their enemies as an engineering problem to be solved, rather than a glorious contest to be won. It was terrifyingly effective, and it was only the beginning. War Leader Cratham stared at the tactical display in disbelief. In the past week, 17 different Drakthul facilities had been attacked across 8 star systems. Supply convoys were being hunted by ghost fleets that appeared without warning and vanished before reinforcements could respond. Communication relays were being systematically destroyed, leaving entire sectors isolated from central command. This is not possible, he growled, his massive claws clicking against the display controls. Our intelligence networks show no major fleet deployments. Where are these forces coming from? His chief tactician, Vektar, had been analyzing the attacks for days without reaching satisfactory conclusions. The strike forces appear to be small, no more than 20 vessels each, but they coordinate their attacks across vast distances with perfect timing. Show me the pattern again. The display updated to show the sequence of attacks. Each strike had targeted a different type of facility. Mining operations, supply depots, communication arrays, fuel refineries. The attack seemed random at first glance, but Vektar had identified a disturbing pattern. They are not trying to capture territory, he explained. They are systematically dismantling our logistical infrastructure. Every facility they destroy forces us to divert resources to protect similar installations elsewhere. Kratham's understanding of warfare had been shaped by centuries of successful campaigns. The Drakthul way was simple. Identify the enemy's main force, engage it with overwhelming numbers, and destroy it completely. These new tactics were incomprehensible to him. Then we force them to fight properly, he decided. Concentrate our fleets and challenge them to open battle. War leader, Vektar said carefully. Our attempts to concentrate forces have been unsuccessful. Each time we mass ships in one system, the enemy strikes somewhere else entirely. They seem to know our movements before we make them. This was not entirely accurate, but it was close enough to the truth to be deeply unsettling. The human strategy was actually much simpler than the Drakthul realized. Instead of trying to predict enemy movements, they had made themselves unpredictable. Their strike forces operated independently, choosing targets based on opportunity, rather than following a grand strategy. It was chaos, but it was controlled chaos. Meanwhile, aboard the human command ship Indomitable, General Chen was conducting what she called a lessons learned session with her senior officers and alien allies. The conference room was crowded with representatives from multiple species, each sharing insights from recent operations. The Drakthul are adapting faster than we initially projected, reported Commander Sarah Kim from the Intelligence Division. They've increased patrol frequencies and started deploying rapid response forces to protect high-value targets. Good, Chen replied, surprising several of the alien observers. That means they're thinking defensively instead of offensively. Every ship they assign to patrol duty is a ship that's not attacking our worlds. Sub-Commander Vexrin still struggled with human tactical thinking. But they are learning our methods. Soon they will be able to counter our attacks. Then we'll change our methods, said Colonel Torres simply. That's what adaptive warfare means. The enemy adapts to what we did yesterday, so we do something different today. Chen activated a new display showing the current strategic situation. Phase 2 is complete. We've forced them to spread their forces and adopt defensive postures. Now we move to Phase 3. The plan that emerged was even more audacious than the previous operations. Instead of attacking facilities, the humans proposed targeting Drakthul fleet units directly, not in formal battles, but through a series of coordinated ambushes designed to destroy enemy vessels while avoiding decisive engagements. This is madness, protested Admiral Korvash. You want to hunt their warships with inferior numbers and technology? Superior numbers and technology haven't been working out for you, Torres pointed out. Maybe it's time to try superior tactics and training. The first ambush took place in the Rigel system, where a Drakthul battle group was escorting a supply convoy to a forward base. The human-led strike force had been waiting in the asteroid belt for 3 days. Their ships powered down and virtually undetectable. Captain Rodriguez commanded the operation from her destroyer, watching as the enemy formation approached the predetermined kill zone. The Drakthul moved in standard escort formation. Heavy cruisers at the front and rear, destroyers on the flanks, and the supply ships protected in the center. Target the escorts first, she ordered. Disable their ability to maneuver, then work inward. The attack began with long-range missile salvos from concealed positions throughout the asteroid field. The Drakthul had excellent point defense systems, but they had been designed to counter energy weapons and guided projectiles. Human missiles were different. They were kinetic kill vehicles packed with conventional explosives and programmed for maximum damage rather than elegant destruction. The first wave of missiles overwhelmed the escort destroyer's defenses. Through sheer volume, instead of sophisticated seeking systems, the humans had simply launched enough projectiles to guarantee hits. The Drakthul point defense systems destroyed 60% of the incoming missiles, but the remaining 40% were more than sufficient to cripple their targets. This is barbaric, Sub-Commander Vexrin observed as he watched the human tactics unfold. They are wasting enormous amounts of ammunition. Ammunition is cheaper than ships, Rodriguez replied. And ships are cheaper than trained crews. We're optimizing for different variables than you are. The second wave of the attack came from the human fighters, which had been hiding in the shadows of larger asteroids. Unlike the elegant space superiority fighters used by other species, human craft were essentially flying weapons platforms designed for one purpose: killing enemy ships at close range. They swarmed the crippled destroyers like angry hornets, their projectile weapons chewing through armor that had been weakened by the missile strikes. The Drakthul cruisers tried to provide supporting fire, but the humans stayed too close to the disabled ships for the larger vessels to engage without risking friendly fire. "Enemy formation breaking up," reported Lieutenant Chen Wei from his reconnaissance ship. "Heavy cruisers are moving to support the escorts." "Perfect," Rodriguez said. "All units execute Thunder Run." The Thunder Run was a tactic that no civilized military would consider: a direct assault on heavy cruisers by lighter vessels. The human destroyers emerged from the asteroid field at maximum acceleration, closing the distance to the Drakthul capital ships faster than their targeting systems could track. At point-blank range, the technological disparity between human and Drakthul weapons became irrelevant. Kinetic projectiles fired at close range had just as much destructive potential as sophisticated energy weapons. The difference was that humans were willing to accept the risks of close combat. "Hull breach in Sector 7, reported Damage Control Chief Martinez from Rodriguez's ship. "We're taking heavy fire." "Maintain course," Rodriguez ordered. "We don't have to survive this engagement. We just have to make sure they don't either." It was exactly this attitude that made human warfare so terrifying to their enemies. The willingness to trade ships, crews, and equipment for tactical advantage was completely alien to species that had spent millennia trying to minimize casualties. The engagement lasted 47 minutes. When it was over, the Drakthul convoy had been completely destroyed. The human strike force had lost 3 ships and suffered heavy damage to 4 others, but they had eliminated a force 3 times their size. More importantly, they had demonstrated that Drakthul warships were not invincible. The news of the convoy's destruction reached War Leader Kratham 6 hours later. He stared at the tactical analysis in growing horror, not because of the losses but because of the implications. "They sacrificed their own ships to destroy ours," he said slowly. "They accepted casualties that any rational commander would consider unacceptable." Vektar nodded grimly. "It appears they are willing to trade their vessels for ours at unfavorable ratios, as long as they achieve their tactical objectives. But that makes no sense. They cannot replace their losses faster than we can, can't they?" Vektar pulled up intelligence reports on human military production. "Their industrial capacity is enormous relative to their population. They manufacture weapons and ships the way other species manufacture consumer goods. Quickly, cheaply, and in vast quantities." Kratham realized with growing dread that he was facing an enemy that approached warfare from a completely different perspective. The Drakthul had always been successful because they were more willing to accept casualties than their opponents. But humans seemed to view casualties not as losses to be minimized, but as investments to be spent wisely. For the first time since the campaign began, War Leader Kratham began to doubt whether victory was possible. The Drakthul homeworld of Krexnath had not experienced military alerts for over 2 centuries. The massive fortress world was protected by orbital defense platforms that could destroy entire fleets, and its location deep within Drakthul space had always made it untouchable. War Leader Kratham stood in the planetary command center, watching as defensive systems that had never been tested in actual combat came online for the first time. "This is unprecedented," muttered Defense Coordinator Vashkar, his scaled hands trembling as he activated ancient protocols. "No enemy has ever penetrated this deeply into our territory." The truth was that no enemy had ever tried. Previous conflicts with galactic species had followed predictable patterns: formal declarations of war, massive fleet engagements at border systems, and negotiated settlements when casualties became unacceptable. The idea of an enemy striking directly at the heart of Drakthul space was simply inconceivable, until now. The human strategy had evolved beyond simple raids and ambushes. General Chen had realized that the key to breaking Drakthul morale was not to defeat their military forces, but to demonstrate that nowhere in their empire was truly safe. If the humans could threaten the homeworld itself, the psychological impact would be devastating. "Status report," demanded Kratham as alerts continued to sound. "Throughout the command center, perimeter, sensors have detected multiple small formations approaching. From different vectors, Vashkar reported. Total enemy strength appears to be less than 50 vessels, but they're using some kind of stealth technology we haven't encountered before. The stealth technology was actually much simpler than the Drakthul imagined. Human ships had been designed for warfare in contested space, where electronic countermeasures and sensor jamming were standard practice. Their hulls incorporated materials that absorbed rather than reflected scanning beams, and their power systems had been optimized to minimize detectable emissions. To species that had never needed such capabilities, human vessels seemed to appear and disappear like ghosts. Aboard the human flagship Retribution, General Chen monitored the approach to Krexnath with calm precision. The strike force was smaller than any previous operation, but it included the most experienced crews and the most advanced ships in the human fleet. This was not intended to be a decisive battle, but rather a demonstration that would shake the foundations of Drakthul confidence. "All units report ready," announced Captain Torres from the communications station. "Stealth systems are functioning within normal parameters. Enemy sensors have not detected our true positions." Chen nodded, studying the tactical display that showed Krexnath's defensive grid. The orbital platforms were impressive by any standard, with enough firepower to annihilate conventional fleets. But they had been designed to fight enemies who would approach openly and engage in formal battle. "Initiate Operation Thunderbolt," she ordered. The attack began not with the human ships, but with their allies. Crystalline fighters, nearly impossible to detect when phased, penetrated the outer defensive perimeter and began disrupting sensor networks from within. Ethereal scouts moving through dimensions that Drakthul technology couldn't monitor identified weak points in the defensive grid. Meanwhile, Saurian and Altarian vessels created diversions at multiple points around the planet, drawing defensive fire and forcing the Drakthul to spread their attention across numerous threats. "Classic misdirection," observed Commander Zethkari, who was monitoring the operation from a safe distance. "The humans have turned this into a magic show where the audience watches the wrong hand." The real attack came from an unexpected direction: the planet's own moon. Human engineers had been secretly establishing a forward base on the lunar surface for weeks, using mining equipment to hollow out launch facilities deep beneath the surface. When the orbital platforms focused their attention on the approaching fleets, kinetic projectiles began launching from the moon at incredible velocity. These were not sophisticated weapons. They were simply dense metal rods accelerated to enormous speeds by electromagnetic launchers. But at the velocities involved, they carried more destructive energy than most ship-mounted weapons. More importantly, they were virtually impossible to intercept because they had no guidance systems to jam and no explosive components to detonate prematurely. The first salvo struck 3 orbital platforms simultaneously, punching through their shields and armor like bullets through paper. The platforms didn't explode dramatically. They simply stopped functioning as their critical systems were destroyed by kinetic impact. "Impossible," roared Kratham as he watched his defensive grid crumble. "Where are those projectiles coming from?" Vashkar frantically scanned the tactical displays, but the answer was beyond his comprehension. The idea that an enemy would establish a base on their own moon without being detected violated every assumption about space warfare. "The moon. War leader," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "Somehow they've been launching attacks from our own moon." The psychological impact was immediate and devastating. If the humans could establish secret bases on Krexnath's moon without detection, where else might they be hiding? How long had they been watching? What other surprises were waiting? The second phase of the attack targeted the planet's communication networks. Human cyber warfare specialists, working with Altarian technicians who understood galactic computer systems, began systematically disrupting planetary communications. Emergency broadcasts warning of the attack were cut off mid-transmission. Military units found themselves unable to coordinate with Central Command. "We're being jammed across all frequencies," reported the communications officer. "They're not just blocking our signals. They're replacing them with false information." This was psychological warfare at its most refined. Instead of simply preventing communication, the humans were feeding false reports into the Drakthul command network. Military units received contradictory orders. Evacuation procedures were disrupted by fake emergency broadcasts. Civilian populations received warnings about attacks that weren't happening, while real threats went unannounced. The third phase was the most audacious of all. While the Drakthul struggled to understand what was happening to their defenses and communications, human dropships began landing on the planet's surface. Not to conquer territory, but to conduct what they called special operations. These were small teams of highly trained soldiers whose mission was not to fight large-scale battles, but to cause maximum disruption with minimal forces. They targeted power plants, transportation hubs, government facilities, and military command centers. Sergeant Major Williams led one such team through the underground tunnels beneath Krexnath's capital city. Their objective was the Planetary Defense Command Center, where War Leader Kratham was trying to coordinate the response to the attack. "Remember," Williams told his team as they moved through the maintenance tunnels, "we're not here to hold ground. We're here to break things and leave. Maximum chaos, minimum contact." The Drakthul had never encountered this kind of warfare. Their military doctrine focused on large-scale battles between organized forces. The idea of small teams operating independently behind enemy lines was completely foreign to them. "Motion sensors are detecting movement in sectors 7, 12, and 19, reported a security officer in the command center. "Small groups, possibly infiltration teams," Kratham snarled in frustration. "How many enemies are on the surface?" "Unknown, War Leader. Estimates range from dozens to hundreds." The truth was that fewer than 200 human soldiers had landed on Krexnath, but they were operating in teams of 4 to 6 individuals, striking multiple targets simultaneously, before disappearing into the urban landscape. To the defenders, it seemed like thousands of enemies were everywhere at once. Williams's team reached their objective without being detected. The Planetary Defense Command Center was heavily fortified, but its designers had never considered the possibility of attack from within the building itself. The humans emerged from a maintenance shaft directly into the main computer room. "Plant the charges," Williams ordered. 2 minutes and we're gone. The explosives were not designed to destroy the facility, but to disable its computer systems. When they detonated, the command center would lose its ability to coordinate defensive operations for several hours. By the time backup systems came online, the human attack would be over, but the real damage was psychological. War Leader Kratham watched helplessly as his command systems failed one by one. Reports came in of explosions throughout the capital, of power outages in critical facilities, of transportation networks grinding to a halt. "How is this possible?" he demanded. "They have fewer than 50 ships. How can such a small force cause such devastation?" The answer was simple, but it challenged everything the Drakthul understood about warfare. The humans were not trying to conquer Krexnath or destroy its military forces. They were demonstrating that the Drakthul homeworld, the heart of their empire, was vulnerable to attack by a force that was smaller than a single battle group. The implications were staggering. If humans could reach Krexnath, they could reach any world in Drakthul space. If they could disrupt the homeworld's defenses, The emergency session of the Drakthul War Council convened in a bunker deep beneath the capital city of Krexnath. For the first time in centuries, the most powerful military leaders of the empire gathered not to plan conquests, but to discuss the possibility of defeat. War Leader Kratham looked around the table at faces that showed emotions he had never seen before: uncertainty, fear, and something that might have been desperation. "The situation reports are disturbing," began Intelligence Coordinator Jekrol, his normally steady voice wavering slightly. "In the past month, we have lost 47 supply depots, 23 communication relays, 16 mining facilities, and 8 major fleet units. Our forces are scattered across dozens of systems trying to protect installations that may or may not be targeted." War Leader Vekshan, commander of the 2nd Battle Fleet, slammed his claws on the table. "This is not warfare. This is chaos. How can we fight an enemy that refuses to engage in proper battle? The same way they have been fighting us," Kratham replied grimly. "By abandoning everything we thought we knew about proper warfare." The holographic display in the center of the table showed the current state of Drakthul space. Red markers indicated facilities that had been destroyed, while yellow markers showed installations under threat. The pattern was clear. The humans and their allies were systematically dismantling the Empire's ability to support its military forces. "Our psychological warfare specialists have completed their analysis of enemy tactics," continued Jekrol. Their conclusion is that we are not fighting a conventional military campaign. We are fighting what they call a total war, designed to destroy our will to continue fighting. War leader Gorthax, the oldest member of the council, spoke for the first time. Explain this concept of total war. Traditional warfare seeks to defeat enemy military forces through superior tactics and technology, Jekyll replied. Total warfare seeks to destroy the enemy's entire capacity to resist by attacking not just their armies, but their infrastructure, their economy, their civilian population, and their morale. The silence that followed was profound. The Drakthul had always been aggressive warriors, but their conflicts had followed certain unspoken rules. Military targets were attacked, civilian populations were conquered but not massacred, and infrastructure was captured rather than destroyed. You are saying they seek to destroy us completely, Gorthax said slowly. No, Kratham corrected. They seek to make us believe that continuing to fight will result in our complete destruction. There is a difference. He activated the display to show detailed analysis of human tactics. Look at their target selection. They could have destroyed our orbital defense platforms around Krexanath, but they chose to disable them instead. They could have killed thousands of civilians during their surface operations, but their casualty reports show minimal non-military deaths. Vekshan studied the data with growing confusion. Then what is their objective? To demonstrate that they can destroy us whenever they choose to do so, Kratham replied. They are showing restraint deliberately, to prove that our survival depends on their mercy rather than our strength. Meanwhile, in the Galactic Defense Council headquarters, General Chen was conducting her own strategic assessment. The human campaign had exceeded all expectations, but she was acutely aware that the most dangerous phase was yet to come. Status of Drakthul military forces, she asked Colonel Torres. Scattered and demoralized, but still substantial, he replied. Our intelligence estimates suggest they retain approximately 60% of their original fleet strength. If they chose to concentrate their forces and fight desperately, they could still inflict significant casualties. Chen nodded thoughtfully. This was the critical moment in any campaign, the point where a beaten enemy had to choose between surrender and a final, potentially catastrophic battle. The Drakthul were proud warriors who had never experienced true defeat. They might choose to fight to the end rather than accept terms. Recommendations from the psychological warfare team, she asked. Dr. Sarah Martinez, the expedition's senior psychologist, pulled up her analysis. Drakthul culture is based on concepts of honor and strength. They respect power, but they also respect mercy shown by the powerful. If we offer terms that allow them to maintain some dignity, they're more likely to accept surrender. And if we demand unconditional surrender, then they'll almost certainly choose to fight a final battle regardless of casualties. Their cultural programming would make surrender without honor literally worse than death. Chen considered this carefully. The easy path would be to continue the campaign until Drakthul resistance collapsed completely. But that would require months of additional fighting and enormous casualties on both sides. The more difficult path was to find a way to end the war through negotiation. Open a communication channel to their leadership, she decided. It's time to talk. The message that reached war leader Kratham 6 hours later was unlike any communication he had ever received from an enemy commander. Instead of demands for surrender or threats of destruction, it was a simple request for a meeting to discuss terms that would honor the courage shown by Drakthul forces while acknowledging the current strategic reality. It could be a trap, warned Vekshan. They may seek to capture or eliminate our leadership. To what purpose? Kratham replied. If they wanted us dead, we would already be dead. They demonstrated that on Krexanath. The meeting was arranged at a neutral location, the ancient trading station of Havexnor, which had served as a diplomatic meeting place for countless species over the centuries. General Chen arrived with a small escort, as did war leader Kratham. Both leaders were accompanied by advisors and translators, but the essential conversation was between two military commanders who understood the realities of their situation. You fight well, Chen said without preamble, as they sat across from each other in the station's diplomatic chamber. Your forces have adapted to our tactics faster than we expected. Kratham was surprised by the straightforward compliment. Your tactics are unconventional. We were not prepared for warfare conducted without regard for traditional limitations. traditional. Limitations exist because most species fight wars they can afford to lose, Chen replied. When survival is at stake, limitations become luxuries. And you believe our survival is at stake? Chen activated a holographic display showing the current strategic situation. Your empire spans 47 star systems. In the past 3 months, we have demonstrated the ability to strike any target in that space, with forces you cannot effectively counter. Your military commanders are spending more time protecting installations than planning offensive operations. The analysis was accurate, and Kratham knew it. What are your terms? Withdrawal from all territories conquered in the past 5 years. Reparations to species harmed by your expansion. Acceptance of Galactic Defense Council oversight of your military activities for a period of 25 years. Kratham's advisors stirred angrily at the terms, but he remained calm. And in return? An end to hostilities. Recognition of Drakthul sovereignty over your core territories. Full membership in the galactic community with all the trade and technological benefits that implies. You would allow us to keep our independence? We're not interested in conquering your empire, Chen said simply. We're interested in stopping your expansion and preventing future conflicts. A Drakthul empire that operates within galactic law is much more valuable to everyone than a destroyed Drakthul empire. The negotiations continued for 3 days. The final agreement included provisions for gradual withdrawal from conquered territories, establishment of joint monitoring stations, and integration of Drakthul forces into peacekeeping operations under galactic oversight. Most importantly, it included a clause that few of the other delegates fully understood, a mutual defense agreement between humanity and the Drakthul Empire. Why offer them protection? Asked Commander Zethkari privately. They were our enemies. Because they're excellent warriors, Chen replied, and because the galaxy is a large place with many potential threats. Better to have the Drakthul fighting beside us than against us. War leader Kratham signed the agreement with mixed emotions. It was not the glorious victory his people had expected, but it was not the crushing defeat they had feared. Most importantly, it allowed the Drakthul to maintain their honor while acknowledging a new reality. As he prepared to return to Krexnath, Kratham approached General Chen one final time. There is something I must ask, he said. Your species is clearly capable of devastating warfare. How do we know you will not turn these capabilities against us once this conflict is resolved? Chen's answer was the same one she had given Commander Zethkari months earlier. Because the best way to ensure peace is to make sure everyone knows exactly how terrible war can be. It was a philosophy that would shape galactic relations for generations to come. 5 years after the Treaty of Havexnor, the galaxy had settled into an uneasy but stable peace. The Galactic Defense Council headquarters had been relocated to a massive space station at the intersection of major trade routes, where representatives from 23 different species worked together to maintain the balance that humanity had fought to establish. General Chen, now bearing the title of Strategic Coordinator for Galactic Defense, stood before a mixed assembly of military officers from across known space. The briefing room contained humans, Drakthul, Altarians, Saurians, crystallins, ethereals, and a dozen other species, all wearing the unified insignia of the Galactic Defense Force. Today marks the 5th anniversary of the end of the Drakthul War, she began, her voice carrying to every corner of the room through universal translators. But more importantly, it marks the beginning of a new era in galactic warfare doctrine. Commander Zethkari, now serving as Deputy Strategic Coordinator, activated the main display. It showed a 3-dimensional map of explored space with trade routes, communication networks, and defensive installations clearly marked. The galaxy looked very different than it had 5 years ago. The integration of human tactical doctrine with traditional galactic military science has produced remarkable results, Zethkari explained. Conflicts that might have lasted years now resolve in weeks. Disputes that might have escalated to warfare are deterred by the knowledge of what modern warfare actually entails. War leader Kratham, who now held the position of Operations Director for the Drakthul sector, stood to address the assembly. His presence in the room was a powerful symbol of how completely the strategic landscape had changed. The humans taught us that warfare is not a game to be played with elegant rules, he said, his translated words carrying the weight of hard-earned wisdom. It is a tool to be used when all other options have failed, and when used, it must be used decisively. The transformation had not been easy. Many species had struggled to accept the new realities of galactic defense. The idea that small, mobile forces could be more effective than massive fleets challenged centuries of military tradition. The concept that psychological warfare was as important as firepower seemed dishonest to cultures that valued direct confrontation, but the results spoke for themselves. In the 5 years since the treaty, there had been no major interstellar conflicts. Several potential wars had been averted through a combination of diplomatic pressure and the implicit threat of human-style warfare. Pirates and raiders had largely disappeared from major trade routes, discouraged by the knowledge that any attack might trigger a response they were not prepared to handle. The Cephalian incident, Chen continued, referring to a recent crisis that had nearly escalated into warfare, demonstrates the effectiveness of our new approach to conflict resolution. The display changed to show the Cephalian system, where a territorial dispute between two species had threatened to explode into open warfare. Traditional diplomatic approaches had failed, and both sides had begun mobilizing their fleets for what promised to be a devastating conflict. Instead of allowing a formal war to develop, we deployed a single mixed-species task force to the disputed system, explained Colonel Torres, who had been promoted to Director of Special Operations. The mission was not to take sides, but to demonstrate that any conflict would be contained and ended quickly, regardless of which faction initiated hostilities. The task force had included human ships alongside Drakthul cruisers, Altarian fighters and Saurian support vessels. Their presence in the system had sent a clear message. Any attempt at warfare would face immediate intervention by forces trained in human-style tactics. The psychological impact was immediate, Torres continued. Both factions realized that traditional warfare was no longer possible. They couldn't fight each other without fighting us, and they couldn't fight us without accepting casualties that would make victory meaningless. The crisis had resolved through negotiation within a week. Neither side had been forced to surrender or accept humiliating terms. They had simply been confronted with the reality that warfare offered no path to victory, only mutual destruction. But the most significant change was not in how conflicts were resolved, but in how they were prevented. The galaxy had developed what historians would later call a culture of deterrence, where the mere possibility of warfare was so terrible that most disputes never escalated beyond diplomatic protests. The Altarian crystalline trade dispute, offered Subcommander Vexrin, now serving as a tactical instructor, was resolved through economic negotiations because both sides understood that military action would result in intervention by forces they could not defeat. Dr. Martinez, who had transitioned from psychological warfare to diplomatic analysis, stood to present her findings on the broader implications of the new strategic environment. We are seeing fundamental changes in how species approach international relations, she explained. The knowledge that warfare has become too destructive to be practical has forced everyone to become better at diplomacy. Conflicts that might have simmered for decades are now resolved quickly, because nobody wants to be the first to cross the line that triggers military intervention. The transformation extended beyond military affairs. Trade had flourished under the protection of the Galactic Defense Force. Scientific cooperation had accelerated as species that might once have been rivals found themselves working together as allies. Cultural exchange had increased dramatically as the fear of interstellar warfare diminished. There is, however, a potential concern, Chen acknowledged, addressing the elephant in the room that everyone was thinking about, but nobody wanted to mention directly. Our success in maintaining peace depends on the continued credibility of our deterrent capabilities. If we ever face an enemy that is not deterred by the prospect of human-style warfare, the entire system could collapse. It was a sobering thought. The galaxy's peace depended on the fear of warfare becoming so terrible that nobody would risk triggering it. But what if someone appeared who was not afraid? What if humanity encountered an enemy that welcomed the kind of total warfare that had defeated the Drakthul? Commander Zethkari addressed this concern directly. Our intelligence networks monitor the galaxy continuously for signs of emerging threats. We have established early warning systems that would detect the development of new military technologies or tactics. Most importantly, we continue to evolve our own capabilities to stay ahead of potential adversaries. The humans have taught us something crucial, added War Leader Kratham. The strongest military is not the one that wins the most battles, but the one that prevents battles from happening. True strategic success is measured not by victories, but by conflicts that never occur, General. Chen concluded the briefing with a reflection on how the galaxy had changed since her first meeting with the Galactic Defense Council 5 years earlier. When we first encountered the Drakthol crisis, every species in this room believed they understood warfare. We had all developed sophisticated military doctrines based on thousands of years of experience. But we had forgotten something important. Warfare is not about following rules or maintaining traditions. It is about survival. She gestured to the diverse assembly of officers before her. Today we have military forces that represent the best qualities of every species. Altarian precision, Saurian strength, crystalline adaptability, ethereal subtlety, Drakthol courage, and human determination. But more importantly, we have leaders who understand that the greatest victory is the war that never has to be fought. As the briefing concluded and the officers dispersed to their various duties, Chen remained behind to study the galactic map. The peace they had built was fragile, dependent on maintaining a careful balance between strength and restraint. But it was real, and it was working. Somewhere in the depths of space, beyond the reach of their sensors and intelligence networks, new threats might be developing. Other species might be preparing for conflicts that would test everything they had learned about warfare and diplomacy. But for now, the galaxy was at peace. And for the first time in centuries, that peace was backed by the kind of strength that made war itself too terrible to contemplate. The humans had taught the galaxy a new definition of victory, not the conquest of enemies, but the creation of a world where enemies chose not to fight. It was a lesson that would shape the future of civilization among the stars for generations to come. In the end, humanity's greatest contribution to galactic civilization was not their skill at warfare, but their understanding of how to make warfare unnecessary. They had shown the galaxy that true strength lay not in the ability to destroy enemies, but in the wisdom to make enemies choose peace instead. The age of elegant warfare was over. The age of lasting peace had begun.